Hi. Well, today I thought I'd talk about my absolute all-time favorite horror film ever, and that is Creepshow from 1982, written by Stephen King and directed by the late great George A. Romero. And this is the new Scream Factory Collector's Edition Blu-ray, which I think is their best release so far. The new 4K high definition transfer looks fantastic. It's loaded with special features, including the deleted scenes, which were previously only available on the UK special edition. So if you haven't picked this up and you're a fan of this movie, you should definitely get it. It's worth having. It's really spectacular release. Anyway, this is my all-time favorite horror movie ever. Unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to see it in theaters when it came out in 1982 because I was pretty sick and in the hospital for a while during that period of time. But I did eventually catch it on cable TV when I was really very, very young. I was like 4 or 5 years old, I believe, and I immediately fell in love with it and became a huge Stephen King and George A. Romero fan. I read all of Stephen King's books and watched all of the movies and all of George Romero's movies, and I became, a fanatic of both of those guys, and I still am. But it's an homage to the EC horror comics of the 1950s, Tales from the Crypt, The Vault of Horror, and The Haunt of Fear, and it features five different stories. And a wraparound segment, which features a father chewing his son out because he catches him reading the Creepshow comic book and he doesn't approve of it at all. And the dad is just a real asshole. He slaps his kid and tells him that if he ever catches him reading worthless shit like that ever again, he won't sit down for a week, and he throws the comic in the trash. But he eventually gets his comeuppance at the very end of the movie. I'm not going to say how because I don't want to spoil it, but he gets what's coming to him all right. But the stories are all very stylized visually, and particularly the first story, Father's Day, which is about a murdered patriarch of a rich family who comes back from the grave 7 years after he was murdered by his daughter to exact revenge on the family, and it's a really fantastic story. I think it's the most underrated story in the movie, but it's really fantastic looking. It really does look like a comic book come to life with all of the bright, oversaturated colors and the hand-drawn comic book panels. It really does look great. And the second story is called The Lonesome Death of Geordie Verrill, which stars Stephen King himself in the title role, and he plays kind of a ignorant backwoods country bumpkin type who discovers a meteor that's crash landed in his backyard, and the meteor cracks open and leaks this blue fluid all over the place, which causes everything to grow this green crabgrass type stuff, and it grows all over everything, including him. And I think it's really the most depressing story in the movie because even though he's a complete idiot, he really doesn't deserve his fate, and the ending of the story is pretty depressing. Even though at the same time it's also the most humorous of all the stories because Stephen King is really campy and over the top and kind of cartoony in his performance, which was deliberate. I know a lot of people criticize his performance, saying that it was really terrible acting, but I don't think it was at all. I think he knocked it out of the park. His performance is it's goofy and silly, but at the same time, it's strangely believable. He really is convincing as this goofy character, Jordy Verrill. And George Romero instructed him to play the character like the Roadrunner in the Warner Brothers cartoons, and he absolutely did that. So I think it's a really fantastic story, very well acted, pretty underrated too. I think Father's Day and Jordy Verrill are both very underrated stories. But anyway, the next story is Something to Tide You Over, starring Leslie Nielsen and Ted Danson. And Leslie Nielsen plays this TV executive who discovers that his wife has been having an affair, and goes to the guy's house, the one who's having an affair with his wife, and lures him out to the beach and pulls a gun on him and forces him down into a hole that he dug on the beach below the high tide line, buries him up to his neck, and then forces him to watch the wife that he'd been having an affair with drown, you know, on another section of the beach, because he brings a TV monitor out there and forces him to watch that happen. And then when the tide starts coming in, where they are, he goes back to his beach house and watches both of them die on a bank of video monitors that he has set up. So he's just a really sadistic son of a bitch. But he gets his comeuppance too at the very end of the story. Now the next segment is most everyone's favorite, and I can understand why. It's definitely the most violent and bloody of all the stories. It's called The Crate, and it's about a janitor who accidentally discovers a mysterious crate that's buried under the stairwell at this university science lab, and it's been buried under there, or hidden under there, for like 147 years. And he calls a professor friend of his to help him open up the crate. And when they do, they discover that there's something alive in there, and it attacks and eats the janitor and eats a couple more people. And the professor totally freaks out and runs off to his friend's house, who his friend absolutely hates his wife, and rightfully so. She's a drunken, mean, hateful bitch, and he's always having fantasies of murdering her, shooting her, and strangling her. And after his friend tells him the story of what happened, he formulates this plan. So he drugs his friend and then heads off to the university and cleans up the bloody mess that the creature has left behind. And when his wife finally comes home, she discovers a note that he's left for her, which lures her out to the university. And he finally gets his wish. He manages to get rid of her once and for all. But it's an extremely well acted story. I think that Hal Holbrook and Fritz Weaver and Adrienne Barbeau and everyone else in it does a absolutely fantastic job. And the creature effects from Tom Savini are some of his absolute best work. I think Fluffy, which is the creature, the nickname for the creature in the crate, is probably Tom Savini's greatest achievement as a makeup artist, because it really does look like a real creature. But anyway, the last story is called "They're Creeping Up on You," and it's about this millionaire Howard Hughes type guy who lives in this hermetically sealed germ-proof penthouse apartment, and he has a morbid fear of and disgust for cockroaches, which is understandable. But he's just a real asshole. He's really sadistic, and he doesn't treat his employees very well at all. He's just a really disgusting, racist son of a bitch. And but one dark and stormy night, he finally gets his comeuppance. His apartment is completely overrun by thousands of gigantic cockroaches, and he eventually freaks out so badly that he has a heart attack and dies. And after the storm, which causes a power outage, is finally over and the power comes back on, all of the cockroaches in the apartment have mysteriously vanished. And at the very end of the story, it's revealed exactly where they all went. I'm not going to say what that is because I don't want to spoil that. That's one of the most gruesome and iconic moments in the whole film. But anyway, that's Creepshow from 1982, my absolute all-time favorite horror film. I've seen it more times than I would ever care to admit, but I can't help it. I just love it so much. Now, there was there are a couple of sequels. Creepshow 2 from 1987. I enjoy that one. I know a lot of people don't like that very much, but I think it's a very worthy sequel and extremely underrated. Now, Creepshow 3 from 2006. That's another story. That movie really doesn't exist to me, and it's just really, really horrendously awful. Everything about it is bad. I do not recommend seeing that one at all. And I believe Tom Savini even publicly stated that he thought that Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, was the real Creepshow 3, and I completely agree with him. Because the Tales from the Dark Side TV series was originally going to be called Creepshow, but I guess for licensing reasons they couldn't use that title, so they called it Tales from the Dark Side. And it's funny, one of the stories in Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, The Cat from Hell, written by Stephen King, was originally going to be one of the stories in Creepshow 2, but they didn't have the budget for it, so they waited until they made Tales from the Dark Side of the movie to finally make that story. And that's the best story in that movie, I think. But anyway, that's my review of Creepshow 1982. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.